Former Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton has stepped in it again, this time by unironically quoting Martin Luther King Jr. So it is Martin Luther King Day, where we, of course, celebrate the civil rights icon. Now, there is something that a lot of people don't like to celebrate about Martin Luther King Jr., and it's the fact that, of course, that he was an economic radical, or at least considered to be an economic radical. In fact, before I get into that history, let me first just read what Hillary Clinton had said, because it really is going to point out how her and the Democratic Party have basically ignored this history of this, again, very radical, very leftist civil rights icon. So now, here's what she wrote, and this is quoting him, his letter from a Birmingham jail. I had hoped that the white moderate would understand that law and order exist for the purpose of establishing justice, and that when they fail in this purpose, they become the dangerously structured dams that block the flow of social progress. So now she added onto that tweet, this is a subtweet. Okay, now for who? Who is she subtweeting? I mean, knowing Hillary Clinton as I do and her record, she would appear to be subtweeting herself, although ironically. But I'll get to that. So now first, the Democratic Party has been, of course, blaming Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin for blocking much of their agenda. And while they are truly the public face of the blockage of said agenda, I've noted on many occasions that there are other people that would take that place, people like John Tester, Chris Coons, and Dick Durbin. So, you kind of have a situation here where you have the rotating villains inside the Democratic Party who would love to not see any of these reforms go through because, and simply put, it's because the fact that the donors do not want these reforms to get through. And just like the Republican Party, the Democratic Party is wholly owned and operated by the owner-donor class, the billionaires, the people who give campaign contributions, et cetera, the business leaders. So all of them, right? And so you have these intentional blockages. Again, even when it comes down to process, you have the parliamentarian, you have arcane Senate or congressional rules that prevent Democrats from basically taking any sort of positive action that doesn't also mainly help the billionaires and the business corporate class. That said, now, Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin have hit a little bit of a sore spot among Democrats, though, because they've come out against the removing the filibuster, I should say, for the Joe Lewis, it should be John Lewis, shouldn't it? Voting Rights Act. So now that is a much weaker and watered down version of the For the People Act. So now the For the People Act would curb voter suppression and make it easier for Americans to register to vote and cast a ballot. Now that would also outlaw partisan gerrymandering of congressional districts, which of course ends up making it so that Democrats actually have to get way, way more votes in order to retain seats or even gain new seats than they should have before. And by the way, as I pointed out in other segments, you have gerrymandering that also helps Democrats by creating essentially safe districts. So, these safe districts make it easier for Democrats to get elected and retain their personal power, but it also allows Republicans to actually win a majority of seats in Congress, which again prevents Democrats from being able to actually do things that might upset their donors, which they don't want. So now, that said, the For the People Act would also would have changed the FEC, the Federal Elections Commission, changing the number of seats, for example, from 6 to 5. And so you would have no longer partisan deadlock, which we have right now. But you would have one person who's supposed to be an independent, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, 1 tiebreaker vote that's supposed to be an independent, so they could actually do something about, you know, enforcing campaign finance law, which they don't do right now. Now, it would also overhaul said campaign finance laws in order to try to combat political corruption by being a little bit more transparent. It's not exactly where we need to be as far as, you know, campaign finance. You need to get all the money out of politics. You remove the money, you remove the corruption, but it would at least allow for some sort of reforms. But that was too much. That was too much for the Democratic Party, not to mention the Republican Party. And so even though it would have been a step, it was killed by Democrats. Didn't make it. Didn't make it. Now, this would have also helped rein in some corruption. But again, the Republicans, Democrats don't seem to want that because both parties have been corrupted by big money. Now, the Democrats, of course, decided they were going to kill it first because it would have put a couple of limits on big corporate donations. That's how the current Democratic Party is today. So now, Hillary Clinton, well, if she wants to know who the moderate is, the white moderate that puts the dams in to prevent not just societal, social progress, but also economic progress for the black community, well, that's you. That's you. You're the one that's standing in the way. You're the white moderate that Martin Luther King Jr. warned about. Now, by the way, in the history of Martin Luther King Jr., remember, he's a radical leftist who opposed capitalism and compared it to the evils of militarism and racism. And I've got quotes here. I have quotes here from his speeches and from people and from things that he has told his staffers. So now, let me get, and by the way, I put them in chronological order so you can kind of see the evolution here. Now, this is back in a letter in 1952 to Coretta Scott saying this. I imagine you already know that I am much more socialistic in my economic theory than capitalistic. Capitalism started out with a noble and high motive, but like most human systems, it fell victim to the very thing it was revolting against. So today, capitalism has outlived its usefulness. In a speech to the Negro American Labor Council back in 1961, he said, call it democracy or call it democratic socialism, but there must be a better distribution of wealth within this country for all God's children. In a speech to his staff back in 1966, we are saying that something is wrong with capitalism. There must be a better distribution of wealth, and maybe America must move toward a democratic socialism. Another speech to his staff in 1966. You can't talk about solving the economic problem of the Negro without talking about billions of dollars. You can't talk about ending the slums without first saying profit must be taken out of the slums. You're really tampering and getting on dangerous ground because you are messing with folk then. You are messing with captains of industry. Now, this means that we are treading in difficult water because it really means that we are saying something is wrong with capitalism. During a speech to the SCLC board on March 30th, 1967, Martin Luther King Jr. said this, quote, the evils of capitalism are as real as the evils of militarism and evils of racism. I gave you that quote earlier. All right. In August 16th, 1967, he added, and one day we must ask the question, why are there 40 million poor people in America? And when you begin to ask that question, you are raising questions about the economic system, about a broader distribution of wealth. When you ask that question, you begin to question the capitalistic economy. And I'm simply saying that more and more, we've got to begin to ask questions about the whole society. In another Southern Christian Leadership Conference Atlanta speech in Georgia in August 16, 1967, quote, Capitalism forgets that life is social. And the kingdom of brotherhood is found neither in the thesis of communism nor the antithesis of capitalism, but in a higher synthesis. In the book, Where Do We Go From Here? 1967, he said, I am now convinced that the simplest approach will prove to be the most effective. The solution to poverty is to abolish it directly by a now widely discussed matter, the guaranteed income. The curse of poverty has no justification in our age. It is as socially as cruel and blind as the practice of cannibalism at the dawn of civilization, when men ate each other because they had not yet learned to take food from the soil or to consume the abundant animal life around them. The time has come for us to civilize ourselves by the total, direct, and immediate abolition of poverty. In a quote to the New York Times reporter Jose Iglesias in 1968, he said, in a sense, you could say we're involved in the class struggle. In a speech at the Bishop Charles Mason Temple of the Church of God in Christ in support of the Memphis Sanitation Workers strike in March 18th, 1968, 2 weeks before he was assassinated, he added this: if America does not use her vast resources of wealth to end poverty and make it possible for all of God's children to have the basic necessities of life, she too will go to hell. Now, I imagine conservatives would have had a pretty bad time with that. I mean, considering how bad they wrote Obama for Reverend Jeremiah Wright. Now, I got a question here. So now, can you think of anybody, any politician here who considers himself a democratic socialist? May have ran a campaign or two for president, and who consider themselves to be the moderate and who is widely considered to be the moderate? Can you think of anyone? No, I just so happen to have a bit of a comparison here.
You know, I get accused of being kind of moderate and center. I plead guilty.
I am a socialist.
When I think about capitalism, I think about all the small businesses that were started because we have the opportunity and the freedom in our country for people to do that.
What democratic socialism means, to me, is that economic rights, the right for economic security, should exist in the United States of America.
What we have to do every so often in America, which is save capitalism from itself.
There's something wrong when we have millions of senior citizens today trying to get by. There's something wrong when the rich get richer and almost everybody else gets poor.
It's our job to rein in the excesses of capitalism so that it doesn't run amok and doesn't cause the kind of inequities that we're seeing in our economic system.
So what democratic socialism means to me in its essence is that we cannot continue to have a government dominated by the billionaire class and a Congress that continues to work for the interest of the people on top while ignoring working families.
So now, who sounds like they'd be a bit more on the side of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and who has stayed consistent with that same message for over 40 years? I'll leave you to answer that question